Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm here with a discussion video talking about what it means when we say that a book is plot-driven versus character-driven. So I thought that this would be a really interesting discussion to have, especially because I think these are things that I talk about a lot in reviews that I do, where I'll say that a book is more plot-driven or more character-driven, and how that affects my enjoyment of the book or might affect your enjoyment of the book. And I thought maybe it would be useful for some people to really talk about what that means. What do I mean when I say that something is plot-driven or character-driven? What does it mean about what you do or don't like? Shout out to Sydney, who I will link down below if you want to check her out, for inspiring this video. She had some really interesting questions around this, and I thought that this would be an interesting and useful discussion video to make. So today this is what we're going to talk about. Most of the examples that I'm going to be giving you guys are from fantasy, just because that is probably my genre of choice, but I think in different ways this issue applies to a multitude of genres, and I think it's interesting to talk about. It's interesting because I think what people enjoy in a book can be very different, and readers can be very different. If you guys have been following my channel a lot, you might know that I often prefer more character-driven books to more plot-driven books. But what exactly does that mean, and can you really divide things into these neat categories? Yes and no. All books, of course, are on some level of continuum, and everything has some degree of character development or plot that's going on, except for in really extreme cases. But with some of the examples we're going to talk about, hopefully it'll give you some kind of a sense of what I mean when I say things are more driven by one versus the other. When I say that something is plot-driven, what I mean is that the book is really focused on the action. There may be characters, there may be some development of those characters, but really the point of the book and the thing that's keeping you turning those pages is the action and the surprises and the twists. This is something that in some genres you really want a lot of. For example, most mysteries and thrillers are pretty driven by the plot, and that's fine. That's kind of what you're reading it for. In fact, I would say that in most cases, if you get a mystery or a thriller where it is slower paced and more focused on the character development, it's usually more of a literary mystery or a literary thriller, whereas in a lot of popular genre fiction in those genres, you get something that's going to be pretty fast-paced, pretty plot-driven, and what you're really reading for is not so much the characters as it is the twists and turns and the action sequences. When we're talking about fantasy, I'll give you a couple of examples of books that I think are definitely more driven by the plot than they are by the characters. One kind of recent popular book that I think falls into this category is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. Now personally, I really liked this book a lot, although it's gotten some mixed reviews, but this is a book that I think is definitely pretty driven by the plot and by the world. You do get some character development, I do think they're interesting characters, and for me there was enough of a balance there that I enjoyed that, but this is a book that is pretty fast-paced. A lot of things are happening, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of travel, there are a lot of fight sequences, so a lot is really packed into here, and things are very much driven by the plot and the places that the characters are physically moving from place to place and things that they're engaging in. It's not really driven so much by character development arcs, even though you do get a little bit of that within this book as well. So there are cases like this of books that are more plot driven that I enjoy. Then there are cases of books that are plot driven where they're, for example, military fantasy, where it's really focused on the war or the action, that it may not appeal to me so much. This is often the sort of thing you see in action movies, for example, where it's really all about the things happening more than it is about the character development. I would say that the Transformers films tend to be more that way, that the emphasis is more on the action, it's more on the plot. These are not sort of slower paced, introspective, character-driven films, and the same kind of applies to books as well. Another example of a book that is more plot-driven than character-driven, I would say, is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. The first book you get more character development than I think later books, but definitely by the second book in the series, pretty much everything is driven by the plot points, by the action, by the things that are happening. Again, it's one that I enjoyed because I think you get, for me, enough character development that this works, but this is one that is probably going to be more driven by plot. Now I'm going to share a couple of examples of books that I think fall further on the opposite end of the spectrum, where they are much more driven by character. And like I said, I do enjoy plot. I do enjoy action. I just need some character development along with it. But that said, most of my all-time favorite books, not always, but most of them tend to be very character-driven, and so that's really what works for me, but that's not what works for every reader. I think a great example of a super character-driven book is Circe by Madeline Miller. This entire book is from the perspective of Circe, and it is really a very slow-paced, introspective book where things happen, there is a plot, but the main thrust of the book, the main thing that drives the book, is the character of Circe and the way that her experiences shape who she is as a person and the choices that she makes. And that's really what this book is about. And so because of that, because the plot is taking a backseat to the character development, and because it is slower, this is something that not everybody enjoys. Some people would say, oh, it's too boring, it's too slow, not enough is happening, and those are going to be your readers that like something that's a little bit more plot-driven and less character-driven, because this one is definitely super, super character-driven. Another great example of a classic character-driven fantasy novel is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is in some ways literally driven by the character. It is Kvothe, who is the main character, telling his own story. And so this entire book, the whole series, is about Kvothe. It's about his experiences. It's about what those experiences mean to him and how he changes as a character throughout them. There is, of course, a plot, but it's really more about the character of Kvothe and about building the world up around him and telling his story, and some of the plot points are kind of incidental to the main point, which is developing this character in this tome of a book. So this is another great example of something where the plot is a little bit slower paced, maybe a little more meandering, and if you don't like Kvothe as a character, you may not love this book that much because he's kind of the point of the whole thing for the most part. I love it. Again, it's another all-time favorite of mine, much like Circe, but yeah, very, very character-driven, I would say. The final book that I wanted to mention in this video is one that I feel like really nicely balances these two things of plot and character, where you get pretty in-depth character development, but also a lot of plot. And so this is the sort of book that I can see working for both types of readers, and that is Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is adult fantasy about assassin nuns. It's really, really great. There is plenty of plot, plenty of action for people who need that in their reading, but there's also really, really interesting characters with fantastic development of those characters and of the relationships between them, and really good world building. So Red Sister is kind of a nice, happy medium between these two extremes, and it's one that is a favorite of mine, and it's a favorite also of readers who I know tend to enjoy more plot-driven books. So hopefully this was helpful. If this is something that you've been wondering about, what does it mean for a book to be more plot-driven or character-driven? When I say this in my videos, hopefully now you have some better sense of what I'm talking about and what I mean. And now I would love to hear from you. In the comments down below, let me know, which type of reader are you? Do you like books that are more driven by the action and by the plot with a faster pace? Or do you love books that are really in-depth character studies that get into the nitty-gritty of who this person is and how the things happening to them inform the person that they're going to become? Or do you want something that's in between? Do you want a little bit of both? There's nothing that says that you can't have that, because like I said, these books all sort of fall onto a spectrum. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.